DNS zones are a critical concept in the domain name system, DNS, and define a portion of the DNS namespace that is managed by a specific DNS server. A zone is essentially a container for DNS records and is responsible for maintaining information about one or more domain names and their corresponding resource records, such as A records, MX records, etc. A DNS zone is a segment of the domain namespace that is administered by a specific DNS server. It contains the DNS records for a domain or subdomain, helping to map domain names to IP addresses, define mail servers, and manage various types of data for the domain. A zone can be for a single domain, like example.com, or a subdomain, like sub.example.com. In short, a zone contains DNS records that are used by DNS servers to resolve queries for domain names in the zone. There are several types of DNS zones, each serving different purposes. The primary zone, or master zone, is the original source of truth for a specific domain. It is the authoritative DNS zone, where all the domain's DNS records are stored and edited. Changes can only be made on the primary DNS server. The primary zone contains the complete set of DNS records, and other DNS servers, known as secondary servers, replicate data from the primary zone. A secondary zone, or slave zone, is a read-only copy of a primary zone. It is used to provide redundancy, distribute the load of handling DNS queries. Secondary zones receive updates from the primary zone through zone transfers using protocols like AXFR or IXFR. They can answer queries just like the primary zone, but they cannot make changes to the DNS records. They help with load balancing and provide fault tolerance by ensuring that DNS queries can still be resolved if the primary server is unavailable. A stub zone is a special kind of DNS zone that contains only the essential records to identify the authoritative DNS servers for another zone. A stub zone contains only a limited set of records, such as NS, name server records, and SOA, start of authority record. It does not contain the full set of DNS records like A records, MX records, etc. Stub zones are used to delegate DNS resolution between domains, providing a way for a DNS server to forward queries to the authoritative server for a different zone. They are typically used to connect different parts of the DNS hierarchy, especially in large environments. A forward lookup zone is the most common type of zone and is used to map domain names to IP addresses. When a user or application tries to access a website, the DNS system performs a forward lookup by querying the forward lookup zone to get the corresponding A record or A record. A reverse lookup zone is used to map IP addresses back to domain names. This is the opposite of the forward lookup process. In reverse lookup, the query is initiated with an IP address, and the goal is to find the corresponding PTR, pointer record, that maps the IP address to a domain name. Reverse lookup zones are typically used for reverse DNS lookups, which are commonly used in email systems to validate the source of an email. A DNS zone file is a simple text file that contains all the DNS records for a particular zone. It's used by the DNS server to resolve domain names for the zone. A typical DNS zone file includes SOA record, start of authority, which specifies the primary authoritative DNS server for the zone, along with other information like the email address of the domain administrator and timing parameters. NS records, name servers, specify the authoritative DNS servers for the domain. An A record maps a host name to an IPv4 address. An AAA record maps a host name to an IPv6 address. An MX record specifies the mail exchange servers for the domain. A key name record specifies alias names for a domain. A PTR record is used for reverse DNS lookups. A TXT record can contain arbitrary text, often used for verification or for settings like SPF in email. Zone transfer is the process of copying DNS zone data from a primary DNS server to a secondary DNS server. AXFR, full zone transfer, is a complete transfer of all zone records from the master to the slave server. XFR, incremental zone transfer, transfers only the changes made since the last zone transfer, which reduces load on the network. Zone delegation is the process of delegating authority over a subdomain to a different DNS server. It involves creating NS records that point to the DNS servers responsible for the subdomain. For example, a domain example.com may delegate responsibility for a subdomain sub.example.com to a different DNS server by adding an NS record for sub.example.com in the parent zone, example.com. DNSSEC, DNS security extensions, add security to DNS by enabling authentication of DNS data, preventing attacks like cache poisoning and man-in-the-middle attacks. Access control is important as DNS zone files should be protected from unauthorized access, as they contain important configuration data. Proper permissions must be set on DNS server configurations. To prevent unauthorized replication of zone data, zone transfers should be restricted to authorized DNS servers using IP-based ACLs, access control lists. In DNS, a zone is a portion of the DNS namespace managed by a DNS server. It contains DNS records that map domain names to IP addresses, define mail servers, and provide other essential data. There are different types of zones, such as primary, secondary, and stub zones, and DNS servers use zone files to store and manage these records. Zones are crucial for the resolution of domain names to IP addresses, ensuring the correct routing of traffic across the internet and private networks.